And joining me today is Mr. Stan Ozark. Boomer,
Hey, how's it going, Bob?
is it warm up in that country?
No, it's not, and not until this weekend. Not It's supposed to get up into the 30s as we get into the weekend, but yeah, now it's pretty frigid out there, and things are just kind of miserable with all the snow, and then it melted, then it froze. Pretty tough to get around in the city streets with all the ruts and the like. So
Yeah, that's kind of the way it is here. I was supposed to do games at Rocky on Saturday and had a little snowdrift between me and the railroad tracks, and there's only one way across. So
well,
I stayed home and watched it.
yeah, I saw there were quite a few postponements in high school too over the weekend, but we didn't have much up here. We didn't have just cold weather up here this past
Yeah,
weekend.
yeah, we
So,
we got about 10 inches here. So
holy cow.
yeah,
Is that
let's talk some
normal?
basketball. Let's talk basketball
Okay.
instead of cold weather.
Right, indeed. I want to point out something. I'm going to talk about the Wolf Point boys basketball team. Cole Hanks is the head coach of Wolf Point, and he gave my broadcast partner, Glasgow played Wolf Point on Friday night. He gave my broadcast partner and I Wolf Point hats, and didn't really. I certainly appreciated. I just never knew when I would have an opportunity to wear a Wolf Point Wolves hat. I can't wear it in Glasgow, so I'm wearing it today, Bob.
I, s-
Thanks to
I
Cole
see that.
Hanks. I am a Wolf Point wolf now, I guess, during this podcast. But thanks to Cole Hanks for those hats. They're actually really nice hats. So, but the Wolf Point boys unbeaten still, 13-0 after another weekend of wins. Key win the weekend before over Malta, and they've beaten the Malta Mustangs twice this year, which are probably their signature wins on the year. They also have a couple wins over Poplar and a win over Glendive. Glendive, really tall Class A team, but they're struggling a little bit this year. But this is a Wolf Point team that is, I use this term a lot, very athletic. Uh, they're not big. In fact, they struggled a little bit with Glasgow's size on Friday night. Glasgow has that 6'4" eighth grader, and they struggled a little bit with that, and they got in a little bit of foul trouble. But even in that foul trouble, this is a Wolf Point team that still handled Glasgow. They shoot the ball extremely well. They shoot threes from all over. I would venture to say they probably had an off night shooting on Friday night against Glasgow, but they still hit 8 3-pointers in the game. They have kids. Kelby Bauer is a senior. They have Craven Silk. Gage Bushman's a senior. And then Julian Benson is an all-state football player, plays basketball for Wolf Point. He's not extremely tall, but he can really jump, and he causes a lot of problems for a team offensively and defensively, inside and outside. Uh, we were talking to some folks, and they believe this is as strong of a defensive team as you'll find in this area anyway. So they are fun to watch. They shoot all over the place and quick. You know, there are teams that can shoot threes and maybe they're not, so they have to be wide open to do it. This Wolf Point team has several kids who are just rapid fire. Kelby Bauer, he snapped off a three in that game right away, and it was so fast and impressive because he's a pretty high scorer for Wolf Point. But probably they hang their hat on their shooting, but also their defense. They'll put full court pressure on you, try to force you into some turnovers. I wonder just a little bit if they will run into some trouble against bigger teams if maybe they have an off night shooting. Now, while they're not extremely tall, they play big because they're so athletic. They can jump really well and cause problems for you defensively. But this team, the Wolf Point Wolves, unbeaten, 13-0. Last time they made it to state was 2013, the 2012-2013 season, and the Wolf Point community is behind them. It's going to be fun to watch the Wolves as they work through. So they've already with their win so far, even with a couple weeks left in the season, they've already clinched the number one seed in the District 2B. So they'll go into that tournament as a number one seed. But fun to watch, Bob. It's kind of funny when you think about it, or interesting when you consider all the good basketball teams we have just in my area. I'm very fortunate. You have the Leicester boys, who we talked about last week. You have the Wolf Point boys, the Malta boys, the Malta girls, and of course the North Country girls, all probably, well, are vying for trips to the state tournament and trying to bring some trophies home. So some really good basketball in our area.
Yeah, you're kind of fortunate to have that this year. That's for sure. There's some districts and some divisions. I just don't know if it's as good as it has been in the past. I think there's one or two teams, but I think you're pretty fortunate up there that you do have several teams that are playing pretty good ball at this point.
Yeah, and you always wonder what kind of competition they're facing and if they'll be prepared for what they might face once you get to a divisional or state tournament. But uh, it'll be real interesting with Wolf Point, and then the Malta boys. Their record is 9-5 on the season. They've had two losses to Wolf Point, two to Havre, Class A Havre, and then a loss to a very good Missoula Loyola team at an opening tournament in Shelby. So Coach Dave Costin is one of the great coaches in high school basketball. He always has his Malta teams ready to go, and his team this year, they lost Rex Williamson in Connor Tuss from last year, which I believe that they really do miss those two, but they're making up for it. They have Bodie Brendan, Stockton Oxart, and Trayton Wilkie, and I think I've mentioned them before on the podcast. These kids were all freshmen last year and played at a state tournament, and are back 1 year uh, more mature and just as athletic, and they can fire up the threes. They played Glasgow on Thursday and just rained the threes down on the Scotties. And the game was tied at 10-10 at one point in that first quarter. And I think Malta ended up putting together a run and like ended up with 23, 24 points in that first quarter, and went on to about a 40-point win over the Scotties. They shoot well. They have good defense. 9-5 record on the year for Malta, but they play that tough schedule, and Coach Costin will have them ready. They went to state last year, and I know they're looking for a return. In that Northern B division, when you wonder about the boys, Fairfield has only just one loss on the year, and that was the Class C belt. Other than that, Shelby's there, Rocky Boys 9-4, Cutbanks 9-5. So not real sure about the 1B, except with the exception of Fairfield, and they return a lot from last year's team, and they'll provide a lot of competition for the Wolf Points and the Maltas at that Northern B divisional tournament, which will be in Shelby this year.
Yeah, I actually watched quite a bit of the Loyola Big Fort game
Yeah,
Saturday night. That was definitely a defensive battle. I thought both teams played very well defensively and shut the other team down offensively and took some things away from them in that game. But yeah, how big? What was the score between Malta and Loyola? Do you know? Was it a
um,
close game?
actually, it was over 10 points. I looked
Was
at
it
it this morning. Yeah, that was the first game of the season for both teams, but
right?
yeah, it was over 10 points. In fact, I remember watching just a little bit of that game back in December. But um, it's just so hard once you get 14 games later to see where teams stand for sure.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of a lot of things happen in that amount of time. So
Well, and that's, with Wolf Point, they weren't at full strength. They were missing at least one player against Glasgow. So didn't get a chance to see them at their full strength. And I think they probably, the way their schedule looks, they should end up unbeaten going into the district tournament. So they would be favored, I guess is the term, in their regular season game. So Wolf Point probably should be 18-0 going into the postseason. Wolf Point will. The other team I want to talk about was the Malta girls, they have a record of 12-2, and just 2 losses, both coming to a really good Class A team in the Havre Blue Ponies. Those are the only 2 losses for the Malta girls. And I was going through their games, and you talk about a team that has just really taken it to teams. They've held teams to as low as, well, they've held to teams to 13 points twice. They've held teams to 21 points, 26 points 3 times, and 36 points another time. Meanwhile, they've scored in games their highest scoring games, 81, 72, 75, 80, 70, and 61. You just don't see girls basketball teams putting up 70 points anymore. And it gives you an idea about this Malta girls team. They return a lot of talent from last year's team, a couple of all-state players, Maddie Williamson and Allison Coonsey. Coonsey is an all-state player. I'm sure she'll be all-state again this year. She's a 3-time all-state player. She'll be a 3-time all-state player for the Mets. She's going to play basketball at Williston State next year. Williamson and Anderson can shoot the ball. They move the ball around really well. I guess the key here is the difference between the haves and the have-nots, and maybe that's just basketball, is the good shooting teams. And every team I've talked about here, the Malta girls, the Malta boys, and Wolf Point boys, all shoot the ball extremely well and also play good defense. So this is a Malta team that went to state last year, and I know had aspirations of winning a state title last year, and it just didn't work out. I think they got hit with some sickness, and they actually lost to Glasgow on a Saturday morning at the State B tournament. But I know they're raring to go again this year. They had to replace some kids, but they have a French girl who's a really good defender for them. They have a 6-foot freshman who has started for them in the past. So they have some height. They shoot the ball well, and they play good defense. So the Malta girls, 12-2 on the year, really haven't been the only 2 losses to Class A Havre. So when I take a look at the Northern B girls, Fairfield obviously is always there, 8-5, Cutbank 9-5, Conrad 8-6, Shelby 5-9. Those are the teams to watch for over at the District 1B. That Northern B divisional tournament for the girls will be here in Glasgow, and 2 teams advance out of that to the state tournament, so it should be a dogfight there. But Malta should pretty easily win the District 2B title.
Yeah.
The Malta girls.
Is Nate Hammond still coaching at Malta girls?
Yes, he
Yeah.
is. Yep,
Okay.
and his teams, Malta has such a great basketball tradition,
Right.
and they don't rebuild. They reload, and he's going to lose some quality seniors this year, but he has some other kids coming up. But Coonsey is just an incredible player to watch at 5'11". She can play down low. She can shoot the 3. Good defender. And she's been fun to watch throughout her years. Again, she'll be a 3-time All-State player for the Mets.
All right. Well, let's talk about brackets a little bit. Boomer, we talked a little bit about the luck factor last week, and Class C. I just printed off one because the boys and girls are the same. But number 1 out of the West takes on number 2 out of the South in the first game. Then 1 out of the North will take on 2 out of the East. 1 out of the South takes 2 out of the West, and 1 out of the East takes 2 out of the North. Um, up in your country, you're looking at North Country there. The number 1 team in the East plays the number 2 team out of the North. That could be a dogfight in that first game.
Yeah, and that Northern C is always really tough, right? I mean, last year you had those really good teams come out of there, but that's I always look at it. Of course, being out east, you don't hear a lot about the teams in the West, but that is but you hear teams from that Northern C all the time, and you're like, boy, you don't want to run into those teams real early at a state tournament. But the key there is to finish first. So at least you get to play the number 2 team out of the North, because if you finish second in the East, you play the champion of the North. So I
Right.
guess if that's one way to look at it anyway, for sure, for the
Yeah.
Class C girls.
And out of the north, you're probably looking at Roy Winifred, who's number 2 in the
Yeah.
state, and Seiko Whitewater Hinsdale, number 1 in the state. But you also got Plentywood in there. I think they could be a surprise to some people come tournament time
Yeah, that's a team that actually beat North Country, the Seiko Whitewater Hinsdale team, in the C Divisional Championship last year.
last year.
Yeah, and now they have a Brensdal girl. They have Annie Call, but they are lighting it up in the District 1C. I'm sure that's they'll be the favorite over there in the 1C. Now, usually Plentywood and North Country would play each other in an opening tournament here in Glasgow, but Plentywood didn't play in that tournament this year. So those two teams haven't met yet in the regular season, where normally they play each other. I think it's usually the first game of the year. So they're not real familiar with each other, at least this year, as far as playing each other. But, North Country did play Roy Winifred um, early in December and did beat them. So that's something that they hadn't been able to do, but they did climb that mountain this year.
Yeah, that was I think a 4-point game.
Yeah,
I think I read
very
this
tight.
morning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
played in Lewistown. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, well, on the Class B side, um, what do you see there?
Well, it's just what do you have out of the South? Four of the teams come from the South. Half the field comes out of the Southern B division. So who is in the South? I know that Baker's tough, right? They have the O'Connor girl who's a freshman who
Yeah,
lights it up. Huntley Project. Who else is in the South there? That
you got Big Timber.
oh
You can't
yes,
count them out.
yep,
They're pretty competitive. In Columbus, I would say that's probably who you're going to um, see there on the girls' side is probably Huntley, Baker, Big Timber, and Columbus coming out of the South. I'm not going to pick any
yeah,
particular order. I know Huntley's playing awful well right now, but Big Timber, they have the experience, tournament experience. So you never know. I think that Southern Division could be a very good tournament.
yeah, definitely. With and then four teams advance out to state, but Big Timber I think just has the one loss on the season. I know Glasgow played them early in
Yeah,
the year, and they handled Glasgow pretty easily. And then out of the West, you're looking at the Big Fort girls, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I think they look pretty good.
they return. They were at the state tournament last year. Glasgow played them in the consolation game, and they're loaded. They will be probably certainly one of the favorites if they make it to that state tournament. So, but it looks like from the north, two teams will come from the north. Is that going to be a Malta Fairfield mix, or how will that look? But the number one team from the north will play the number three team from the south, and the number two team from the north will play the number one team from the south. So uh, I think you probably want to, if you're coming out of the north, out of this divisional tournament in Glasgow for the girls, you certainly want to be the champion there. So you don't have to take
Yeah,
on whether it's a Huntley Project or Big Timber.
yeah, yeah. And then on the boys' side in Class B, we got as far as the South goes, you got Columbus, Huntley, Red Lodge, Lodgegrass, Manhattan. Um, I don't know. I would say that probably the four are going to come out of those five for sure. Probably. I don't know who's going to get left out in that, but as I said earlier, I watched the Loyola Big Fort game, boys game, and they play pretty good basketball. Um, Out of the West, I think you got to count those two, and then out of the North, you got Malta and Fairfield. I would say.
Yeah, Wolf Point in there as well for the boys,
Yes,
unbeaten at
excuse me.
13
Yeah,
and
full
0.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But one team that's really been kind of fun to watch this year, just the scores, is a Shelby team that they lost Rhett Reynolds from that team last year. And
right.
then longtime coach Tom Reynolds retired. And I think Mike White took over the program. But I think people thought Shelby'd be down this year, but actually things are going pretty good for Shelby. They'll be kind of interesting to watch as well because they had all of the components of that team around Rhett Reynolds, and now the 6'10" kid's gone. So what happens? And when I look at the scores, they got kids putting up 30 points a game. So
Right.
Kyle McDermott and the Richmond kid. So Shelby's a team to watch. And then you never know about Rocky Boy, right?
Yeah.
Rocky Boy come tournament time. Malta has beaten Rocky Boy this year. The Malta boys beat Rocky Boy, but you just never know with them if they get into a divisional tournament, what could possibly happen.
Right. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up. You got any final thoughts? What's coming
Uh,
up this week?
well, I'll watch North Country, the Seiko Whitewater Hinsdale girls come to Glasgow to take on the Scotties, and they'll certainly be favored in that contest. But it'll be fun to watch them one more time in the regular season. Um, and as far as the rest of it, Glasgow takes on Classy Scobie, and I have a Nashua Fraser matchup. So those would be good matchups. Just nothing featuring all of those unbeaten teams or those number one ranked teams or those
Right.
teams in the top five, certainly.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, Boomer. Appreciate it. And I won't tell anybody about your cap.
Yeah, don't tell Brenner. I'll just keep with this.
I think he watches.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bob. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you later. And I'd like to thank our guests that come on the show and talk about Montana high school sports. Without them, this show would not be possible. And once again, if you like this podcast, please click on the subscribe button below to get alerts when we have up a new podcast.